word development implies that we are progressing towards some set of goals. So it is no wonder that the international community has tried to set tangible goals that have been linked with our particular milestones and calendars. At the turn of the millennium, in the year 2000, the United Nations set forth 8 Millennium Development Goals and also set forth a 15-year target to achieve them. And here we have an assessment of what has been achieved by countries in terms of those targets. The percentages account for the number of countries that fall within each category of achievement or lack thereof. There is clearly quite a variation across the goals in terms of the relative success. Extreme poverty alleviation, gender education parity, and improved access to water have been generally positive stories, with almost half of all countries meeting the goals set forth. However, infant and maternal mortality goals have not been met in an alarmingly large number of countries. This is particularly disconcerting since the services to improve these, as well as philanthropic efforts worldwide, have particularly focused on healthcare. This map now shows the level of achievement of the Millennium Development Goals at a global level. Clearly, countries with ongoing conflicts such as Iraq have not been able to attain these goals. Yet what is noteworthy about this map when we consider a country like Iraq is that goal attainment is not an end in itself. Maintaining the standards of these goals is particularly important. Iraq, before the first Gulf War, had met many of the targets which we later enshrined in the MDGs. Yet war led to the country descending into a de-development spiral, similar to what Syria is now enduring. At the same time, the map also provides a hopeful story if we focus on a country like Rwanda, which had a terrible genocide that killed over 800,000 people over a matter of months in 1994. Yet Rwanda has been able to recover over a 20-year period to the point where it is meeting many of its development goal targets. Thus, the take-home message is that development is fragile and needs perseverance to maintain, but human communities are also very resilient and can bounce back when provided an opportunity to do so. Since the 2015 goal deadline was reached for the MDGs, the United Nations initiated the Sustainable Development Goals with another 15-year trajectory to be met by 2030. Unlike the MDGs, the SDGs cover 17 areas of activity, which have been covered in the readings and other presentations in this program. They also have over 169 specific targets. The SDGs are also aimed at all countries and not just developing countries. This is particularly appropriate in countries like Australia, where there are major pockets of underdevelopment in rural or indigenous communities. As we celebrate the SDGs, let us also pause to consider some criticism that has been leveled against them from some venues and how we might respond to this criticism. Economist Bill Easterly has acerbically referred to the SDGs as senseless, dreamy, and garbled. He claims that the goals are unrealistic. No doubt, there is an aspirational quality to the SDGs, and they are a product of global consensus, which makes them a bit convoluted. However, in a world where we aim for deliberative democracy, such output, which harmonizes global aspirations in one platform, is likely to be suboptimal in terms of efficiency. Nevertheless, that is a price which we should be willing to pay to some degree for having more inclusive processes of achievement. Sustainability researcher Bjorn Lomborg has lamented that the SDGs do not prioritize action or provide a return on investment analysis. In a world of scarce resources, Lomborg argues that we have to prioritize. Lomborg has provided his own analysis on what should be the key areas for prioritized investment, which deserve attention as well. His Copenhagen Consensus Center has undertaken a detailed analysis on return on investment on various policies. Some results, such as free trade, may seem to be the establishment view. However, there are some surprises in this analysis as well. Lombard has presented these 4 goals, which should be a priority in his view, spanning the breadth of sustainability, science, and policy. Interestingly enough, coral reef protection is one of Lombard's key priority areas. And he has noted that this is so because of the reef's essential role in preserving biodiversity. The total benefits of natural capital that can be derived from coral reef systems can actually be accounted for in numerical terms. And here is the analysis of about 46 billion pounds, or of about 24 pounds of return on investment for every pound invested. Lombard's next priority area is clean energy. And this is clear because energy is something that we have to rely on in order to get good healthcare, good access to education, to provide electricity for schooling. So it is indeed a limiting resource. He's also looked at the return on investment for clean energy, and the numbers are pretty compelling. For example, 11 pounds of climate damages for every pound spent in terms of the solution of clean energy investment moving forward. Lombard has also proposed a solution for how to fund clean energy. His proposal is a carbon tax, which has been tried before but is politically difficult to implement. Nevertheless, he feels that a compelling case can be made if we are able to have a slowly rising carbon tax and incentives are appropriately calibrated to cut emissions. Lombard's third point is that governments are often responsible for subsidizing unhealthy, unsustainable practices by industry and by consumers. He estimates globally that 351 billion pounds are spent on fuel subsidies, almost exclusively in developing countries such as Nigeria, which may well be oil producers themselves. These subsidies create disincentives for more innovative approaches to solutions that could be moving forward. Perhaps surprisingly, Lombard's fourth point is that indoor air pollution could have the biggest return on investment in terms of human health impacts. That's because in modern societies, we are now spending more than 70% of our time indoors. Therefore, any investment in improving our indoor quality of life can have huge investment returns on health. He's calculated that indoor air pollution itself is responsible for about 4.3 million deaths on average, and that's from data from the World Health Organization. Thus, if we think about the use of fuel wood by 2.7 billion people worldwide, the return on investment we could get for making their lives more healthy by improving their quality through access for clean energy, stoves, and other mechanisms, you could have far greater development goal impact by just investing in indoor air quality. Finally, let us consider the key differentiating aspects of the MDGs and the SDGs in this summary slide from Professor Jomo Sundaram at the Institute of Strategic and International Studies in Malaysia. If you look at this slide, you've got before you key comparative metrics. First, MDGs were aimed at developing countries only. That meant that a lot of developed countries were left off the hook. The SDGs have brought forth the developed countries into the mix as well, thus making it a level playing field and giving incentives for all countries to perform. Secondly, the MDGs were 8 goals for development which were very much siloed from each other. There wasn't as much communication between each of the goals. The SDGs comprise 17 goals and 169 targets, and they integrate 3 key dimensions of sustainable development: the economic, the social, and the environmental. Thirdly, the MDGs were a very top-down process. They came largely from the United Nations Secretariat. And thus, there was a lot of criticism from civil society groups that they did not have the legitimacy at the grassroots. In comparison to the MDGs, the SDGs have come about through a highly negotiated deliberative process, which comprised not just UN member states, but also lots of other stakeholders, businesses, civil society groups, as well as governments. So you've got a much more inclusive process that has led to the SDGs. Finally, in terms of monitoring and evaluation, the MDGs had a very specific means of implementation and monitoring, but there was no follow-up defined in advance. Whereas, if you look at the SDG agenda, there is a very clear architecture for monitoring and evaluation, which has been set forth by the United Nations in consultations with other stakeholders. Thus, the SDGs have much more potential for actually being policed and monitored during the 15-year process, so that if countries are getting off the track, it'll be much easier to put them back on track. So in this module, we've tried to have a more critical perspective on the SDGs. We recognize the fact that they are not optimal by any means, but they are the result of a very complex and inclusive process and are, therefore, much more likely to get traction with multiple stakeholders. Thus, the SDGs should not be dismissed summarily, but should be embraced but carefully monitored by leaders in development practice.